Yeah, as Andrew said, I'm Steve. I live up in the Bay Area, so down here for the weekend just to partake in this. Quick background on me, I grew up in the Midwest in Iowa, studied computer science, computer engineering, undergrad, been in California for about 20 years, got my MBA at Berkeley, worked at Google for almost a decade as a product director at Google, worked on Google Maps for mobile for a long time. And let's see, I left Google in 2015, and then 2017 is when I sort of went down the rabbit hole with cryptocurrency and haven't really looked back. So I've sort of been 24/7 into Bitcoin specifically. So like 2017 was my period of time when I looked at lots of different projects in Ethereum and many other coins. But I decided in 2017 that I thought Bitcoin was super transformational for the world, and I wanted to work on it. So I just started volunteering, getting to know a lot of the open source developers, but also a lot of the companies in the space, finding ways I could contribute to that and help out. And then in 2019, Jack Dorsey tweeted out that he was going to start a new initiative at Square called Square Crypto. And he described what it was, and that sounded like a great match for what I was hoping to do. So I chatted with him and with Square, and that led to getting that job. So I lead, it was called Square Crypto, now it's called Spiral, at what used to be called Square, which is now Block. A lot of name changes in December. So I lead Spiral, and I'll give a little bit of an overview of what we do and how we impact Bitcoin, but I hope to mainly turn it over to Q&A because there's lots of different directions I could go. So I want to go, I want to speak to stuff that everyone here is interested in. So let me give a brief overview of what Spiral is. We're a relatively small team. We have about 8 people, and we're hiring three more engineers right now. So we'll be 10 or 11 people. The full-time team focuses on a project called Lightning Development Kit, or LDK, which is it's a dev toolkit. So the users of that are developers, but it's intended to make building Bitcoin and Lightning wallets much, much simpler. In fact, your very own Steve Myers works on BDK, Bitcoin Development Kit, which is sort of a sibling project to it that helps developers as well. So part of what we do is a full-time team that focuses on LDK. Another big part of Spiral is our grant program. And we've issued, I think, over 40 grants now to over 24 developers and designers around the world, Steve Myers being one of them. And that really works out well for people seeking grants, I think, because it gives people ultimate freedom. Like Steve has to be his own boss. Like I'm not his boss. I don't have to check in with him or tell him what to do. He already has a project in mind. He knows how he wants to contribute to Bitcoin, and so do all the other couple dozen grantees. They know they have a project in mind. They know how they want to contribute to Bitcoin. As long as Spiral sees value in that project concept, believes they can deliver on it, then we sign them up for typically 12 months at a time grant. And that program's really been successful. We have grantees in I think 18 countries around the world now. So it's a really good global presence. And unlike it's also it impacts Bitcoin in a broader way than just the LDK project. We support people on many different Bitcoin projects, including Bitcoin Core, BTC Pay, which is merchant software. I was just talking to some folks earlier about Summer of Bitcoin, which is a new program started in India, but it's global now, targeting university students who are interested in Bitcoin development and training them to work on open source Bitcoin projects. So that's the 2 big areas that Spiral invests in: the full-time team, the grant program. Another thing that we do, and part of my job, I also help Block, the larger company, which you probably know more as Square, just with their overall sort of Bitcoin strategy. And there's a number of new products or projects within the company that have been kicked off in the past year. I mean, for many years, Cash App has allowed customers to buy and sell Bitcoin But now there's new projects. One is creating a new hardware wallet, and which is kind of similar to what Casa does. And there's a new mining project, which I think is super exciting. And there's a few other new projects within Block. So I'm happy to talk about wherever people's interests lie. So we can talk about open source Bitcoin development. We can talk about some of Block's new product initiatives. I'm happy to talk about, I guess I'm passionate about Bitcoin adoption and just making it easier for mainstream people around the world to be able to use Bitcoin and use it in a variety of ways, using it as like sort of digital gold store of value, but also eventually being able to spend it and use it. We're very driven by long-term making Bitcoin like a currency, daily use currency, and using it in that way, which has a lot of challenges that just sort of the digital gold narrative of Bitcoin doesn't have. In my own opinion, I feel like Bitcoin is a store of value. The product's already there. It's just a matter of like education of people around the world. But using Bitcoin as a currency, there's still a lot of software engineering challenges and design challenges to make that realistic, as well as like regulatory and tax and all kinds of other things too. So happy to turn it over to questions. Yeah.
These are still companies that are operating at, I guess we could say, in the traditional model where they have employees and revenue and costs and budgets. And so I'm wondering what are like some of the maybe goals or guidelines that are followed to track progress and make decisions on whether more grants are given or existing grants are increased or things like that, or is it just like a broad, let's try Bitcoin adoption as much as we can?
Yeah, that's a good question. The quick answer is it's kind of the latter, but let me add a little bit more detail. And actually, let me say, Spiral, like the team I lead, we operate completely independently from Block, the corporation. We report straight into Jack Dorsey. No one tells us what to do. We get to choose what we get to do. All he cares about is that we help Bitcoin. So you can think of us as like Team Bitcoin. So we're just supposed to help drive Bitcoin adoption. So let me answer your question in both directly what you asked, but also in a maybe indirect way. Like why is Block doing that? Like Block is a for-profit company. The strategy for Block is that, Jack definitely has a belief in Bitcoin, becoming the native currency of the internet. And if the more popular Bitcoin becomes, there's going to be lots of financial services and business opportunities that are brand new that Block as a company can capitalize on. So that's why Block invests in Spiral. As far as how we track progress, you can ask Steve how draconian I am as a lead, but no, there's with the grant program, we do vetting up front. Like again, the project has to basically, how does it add value? How does it improve Bitcoin? And typically along at least one of four pillars, like improving user experience, scaling, privacy, or security. One of those four areas. In some projects, improve multiple of those. And if the project makes sense, we get the grant. There's very little check-in during the grant. Although, because it's all open source, I'm always looking at GitHub activity just to see what work's being done, what are some of the challenges being faced by a developer or a project. Just based on that, I can sort of tell is progress being made. And as long as the project continues to make sense and there's been reasonable progress towards that goal, then we're happy to renew grants and keep funding it. Also, there's a framework we have in mind, which we should talk about. Connor's on my team, also the grant program. Yeah. So you can think of the projects that we fund going through different phases. So phase one is like a seed stage. And like the BDK project, which Steve works on, it started from scratch. Like him and another developer, Alikos, started it from scratch. So you can think of it as like a seed stage, but then it sort of like can mature and grow up to a point. The second stage is there's multiple contributors, which BDK is already at. There's at least half a dozen pretty active contributors to that project, which is awesome. The next stage is that it's funded by multiple entities, which is really important in Bitcoin because we don't want all these projects, even if they're successful, to be solely dependent on Spiral and Block funding because of, even though we're well-intentioned and we want what's best for Bitcoin, you still don't want one entity with that much influence and the risk of just like someday it might just go away, and we want these projects to be self-sustaining. So it's really important to have other funders in addition to Spiral. So that's another way to like track the progress of these projects. Like, are they sort of moving through these different phases?
I'll just add one other thing that they do is matchmaking. Like Steve, and he's kind of helped introduce us to other projects. He introduced me to Alikos, who's the other person on BK, and I think ultimately helping projects that might be able to use our library find out about it, and that's like a sort of a side benefit of this grant program. It's not just the money, but it's the kind of connections in terms of making people aware of the project.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of that, I mean, one problem in traditional open source software is like you might have a talented developer create software that's valuable, but that developer might not have like marketing skills or like to spend time trying to find adoption for it, and then no one actually uses that software. So it's kind of pointless. Or, I mean, it's like a hobby project at that point, but it's not actually improving the world. So another thing Spiral tries to do is help the developers in the projects actually gain adoption. And so the LDK project I mentioned, Lightning Development Kit, has a big adopter right now. Cash App, which the product from Block, is now using that. That product just added Lightning support, and they're using LDK for that Lightning support, which is really exciting. Yeah.
For adoption for merchants, one of the challenges I found is trying to build out connect a Lightning node was just liquidity, and paying for a ticket, but then I'm waiting still like 7 days for the thing to get filled. I don't know when it's going to get filled or if it'll get filled. So just curious if that's something that your team in terms of adoption is thinking about. How can we help merchants get started with their first liquidity, right? Because they need inbound liquidity as merchants to receive payments, and it's a little bit challenging initially.
Yeah, so you're definitely right. Liquidity is a big challenge with Lightning Network. So Spiral's not going to run like operate services, so we're not going to directly offer liquidity. But one area we're trying to think about how we can help with that. And one way we might be able to help is to develop open source software and develop like a standard protocol. So multiple liquidity providers could use the same protocol and interoperate with different wallets. And I think that would be helpful. But it's going to eventually come from financial institutions, whether it be startups or large financial institutions. They're going to provide the liquidity. But I mean, with Lightning, it can be individuals too. I guess the hope would be it would be very spread out throughout the world, and there'd be many liquidity providers, because it's not a healthy state to be in if it's just like Coinbase and Block.
Yeah, it seems like it's kind of like it was a little bit opaque, the process for me, just because it's like, okay, they tell me I should bid about this much or this percentage or whatever, but I have no idea. Like, is there any way that I could for certain lock in something now? It was kind of like I couldn't tell.
Right. So one, I'm curious. Has anyone used any of a wallet called Phoenix or Moon or Breeze? Anyone use those? Yeah. So maybe half the folks. Those three wallets, I mentioned them because they really improved the user experience of Lightning. Because as you mentioned, like early on of Lightning, if you installed a wallet and you wanted someone to pay you, it couldn't be done. It's called inbound liquidity. And I mean, to a user, it seems kind of strange that if you install a wallet and someone can't send you money, but that's just technically how it works. Those 3 wallets I just mentioned solve that problem by automatically creating a Lightning channel under the hood and giving inbound liquidity. It's all this like technical stuff that users don't really need to know about now, and they can instantly use it and instantly receive money. So I think we're going to see more and more of that. And I hope what Spiral can do to impact that is just make it so that it lower the barriers to those LSPs, so that it's not just a few big companies providing it.
Everybody wants.
Actually, do you want to talk about the design community a little bit? Because that's unique. And I think even if you're not like a hardcore Rust developer or something, there is this community out there that Steve helped start.
Yeah. So when I first started at the company and working on what was Square Crypto at the time, we wanted to impact design and not just software development. And so the original concept was, okay, I'm going to go hire a full-time designer on the team and have that person work on open source design. I, for the next 9 months, interviewed over 50 designers and didn't meet one who met the criteria we were looking for. And then after 9 months, I'm like, okay, what am I doing? What am I doing wrong? Because I'd met a lot of talented people. And I reflected on that and realized what the real problem or what the opportunity is just bringing all these designers together. Because I had met over 50 designers who were passionate about Bitcoin, were really skilled designers. And so in summer of 2020, we announced the Bitcoin Design Community, which is an independent community from Block or Spiral, but sort of seeded it with these designers I had met through this interview process. We funded several through the grant program. I think about eight or so people we funded to get it going. And it's been wildly successful. Number one, it's super decentralized. Like myself and the Spiral team don't have any, overdue influence with it. And there are several projects that have come out of it that are really valuable. One is the Bitcoin Design Guide, which is a guide that is intended to be used by builders. Anyone building a Bitcoin application, it helps them think through many of the common design challenges when creating a Bitcoin wallet and Bitcoin application. In particular, non-custodial Bitcoin applications. So when the user has to control their own private keys, which is not a sort of design pattern that people are used to thinking about. It adds a number of complications when building an application over a custodial application. When you can put all the sort of smarts on a server somewhere, that makes it much easier to design and build than when you're empowering the user and giving them the responsibility to manage their own private keys. So the design guide really emphasizes that part. And I think that combined with the BDK project and the LDK project are three different tools that can be used in concert to make it dramatically easier to build Bitcoin wallets and Bitcoin applications. So that's, I'd say, the biggest thing the design community's created, but they've done a number of other really valuable things. They are doing a wallet improvement project where they're going out and looking at different wallets in the space, like different open source wallets, and just doing design sprints on them and design evaluation and giving feedback to those projects of how the design of those wallets could be improved. And we're already seeing the impact of that, where the wallets are actually, making improvements, and the engineers are welcoming that feedback and responding well to it.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing there's multiple ways to get involved with Bitcoin. It's sort of part of that too. You can be a designer, even as a user, you might look at the design community's website and just give them user input, because I think sometimes that's valuable to just know, hey, I'm a user of this wallet and I looked at your design guide and I think this would be a great improvement or something. It's a resource anybody can go look at if you're building a wallet or using a wallet, or think about open source. Most of them you can if you're using an open source wallet and you think there's a design improvement, you could go to their website, you go to GitHub, make an issue and say, hey, in the design guide, this was a recommendation, here's something you might consider, or whatever. Like it's a way for people to learn and get involved. And actually, I was also if you're just learning about Bitcoin, I think the design guide is interesting because it brings up a lot of interesting user-based issues that you might not know about, like considerations with multiple keys and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's a general educational resource also that's interesting.
It's bitcoin.design is the
I'll
website.
publish the link on the meetup. So if he wants to click the link there.
Yeah, go ahead.
When it comes to Bitcoin adoption, I can probably speak for most people in this room who's ever launched anybody. Generationally, the boomer generation holds an outsized sizable wealth of the entire world. And that's probably the most important generation to onboard, yet it's the most difficult. Because if you onboard somebody who's a Gen X or a millennial or Gen Z, it's astronomically easier. What do you see as the barriers to kind of overcoming that outside of education? Is it a UI UX issue? Is it a killer app? What do you see as changing that?
It's a good question. I've been answered that before, so it's kind of off the cuff. But I would think like ETF would be, or just taking traditional financial institutions like a Fidelity or whatever, and making it easier to their clientele probably is the biggest win for that specific goal. A lot of the stuff I work on is is very distant from that goal. Although I do think a very common path for a lot of new people in the space is they're interested in it from an investment standpoint. They want to, either maintain their wealth or get richer. They buy Bitcoin and maybe initially keep it with a third-party custodian. But as they learn more about Bitcoin, they get more comfortable with it, and they also understand the value of holding your own Bitcoin and controlling your own keys. And that's where a lot of the stuff I just talked about is intended to make it easier. So eventually, like the boomers maybe buy now. Like if an ETF came out, they buy now. Maybe in a few years, they actually will want to control their own keys, and hopefully the improvements that we're impacting and a lot of other folks in the space are improving will make it more realistic for them to do that.
So there's like, I would say like maybe 2 points. One is, so I work at Costa, right? And so one perspective is that like in 10 years, like it's kind of a morbid take, but they're gonna pass away. And so all that wealth will like go to the kids, and like, so like all the education and marketing that we're doing to like this generation it's gonna still be relevant because they inherit that wealth, and then now they can do that and invest into Bitcoin if they choose. But also, like we're seeing a lot of clients who are elderly, and not only do they want to hold their own keys, but like they're really focused on like, how can I transfer this to my kids' wealth, right? So it's about like inheritance. It's about like making sure I have it, and from their perspective, it's like I'm securing my kids' future.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of that narrative.
Yeah, the generational wealth.
Generational wealth.
Which I think is a power. There's many narratives that bring people to Bitcoin, but I think it's a powerful one. I think, yeah.
Yeah, it kind of on the same vein. The Spiral or Block more widely have any kind of education initiatives specifically that they're working on or are going to be putting out to try and bridge that gap. I think most people, have that consensus that education is the thing.
Yeah.
So you guys doing anything along those lines?
A little bit. Fully agree. Education is super important. Just through my own anecdotal evidence, talking to people, but also if you look at survey data, if you look at Americans, tremendous. I mean, basically everyone's heard of Bitcoin. Tremendous interest in it, but the vast majority of people really do not understand it hardly at all. Right. So there's a huge education gap. And I'd say that Block, through its products, tries to educate just by creating simple to use products and through like Cash App itself, which I think is a good. I don't think there's a silver bullet on how to tackle the education problem. One thing that Spiral's helped support is an initiative called Hello Bitcoin, which is a series of introductory beginner level videos, short videos like 5 to 8 minutes long, but tackling just sort of the 101 of Bitcoin, like what is why Bitcoin, why is it useful to the world, and how does it work? And the fourth video is on environmental concerns and addressing that, which is like one of the top critiques or concerns that people express about Bitcoin. So that I think that's content I recommend for anyone new to Bitcoin and just wanting very simple, basic explanations. But there's so many different narratives on Bitcoin and concerns that there's really no one size fits all solution to education. One thing that some folks have discussed is like creating an open source repository of educational content that you could kind of like mix and match. I like that conceptually. I think it'd be really hard to execute, but you can imagine, just like an open source collection of containers of information that could then be pulled together into a slide presentation or into a video or different formats, and then anyone in the world could pull those together to create something that's cohesive. I like the concept, but I think it'd be really hard to actually pull off. And then doing that in many different languages too. That's another, if you're thinking about the whole world, then you have to do a lot of different language support too. So I'm personally, I'm generally a believer the biggest return on investment is great products. Like great products and simple to use products will get more adoption, and then people just sort of naturally learn along the way. Most people don't like to carve out a lot of time just study, like watching tons of YouTube videos and things. I mean, this group might. I do, but I mean, a lot of people don't. So if we just offer great products to people, that they'll start using it and learn along the way.
Yeah, I'm not one of those boomers, but I'm a child of a boomer. So we're not going anywhere. The children of the boomers aren't going anywhere anytime soon. But I see we're watching in real time the concerns of not holding your own coins. I have Bitcoin on an exchange, and it terrifies me every single day when I know that it can be frozen and taken. So getting it off that exchange and onto a hardware wallet, but that also terrifies me. It probably doesn't terrify anyone else in this room, but for people, which I think I'm 99% of the population, getting it off of exchanges and onto hardware wallets and hot and cold wallets, that I think has to be a focus. Is there something out there that you see in onboarding people? Because without holding your own keys, excuse my life, but you're fucked. If someone comes along like what happens in Canada and they just start taking people's wealth in their Bitcoin.
I'd say that's like the number one, should be the number one goal in the space, because if
we got to make it so it's like a car, right? I know how to drive a car, but I can't fix a car. I know how to turn electricity on, but I don't know anything about electricity.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
no, I agree. So I agree. And if we don't improve on the current situation, then the vast majority of people are not going to hold their own keys. Right. And then, in my opinion, Bitcoin will fail because it'll ultimately just be controlled by like Block and Coinbase. Like a few global custodians will hold all the Bitcoin, and then it's very easy to change the rules of Bitcoin if you only have a few entities that control the Bitcoin. So, I mean, the good news is like Trezor, Ledger, products like that have improved each and every year. Like if you look at the trajectory of those products, it just keeps getting better. And then companies like Casa came along and made it much, much easier to do self-custody as well. And they offer like VIP sort of white glove service. There just needs to be a lot more of that. So Block's going to be coming out with a hardware wallet and a non-custodial wallet solution as well, which if that team executes on the product plan, I think it's going to be, move the needle on making it much more accessible for mainstream people to do so, both have the level of security that they should have, but also the peace of mind that they're not messing up their setup. So I think there's a pretty clear roadmap of like user experience and technical solutions to make it better and better and better. So it's just going to be a matter of time. And I think it'll flip. I mean, a lot of my friends are like, why? They ask the question, why should I hold my own keys? Like, it's just easier to use a third-party custodian. And, so you can reference like
tell them the
Canadian soccer and this and that. Yeah.
Keeps you up at night.
But I think the question of once the user experience gets good enough, the question will flip to like, why would you not hold your own keys? When you can't sleep well at night, you're not worried about messing up and losing them yourself, and you're not worried about a thief or a remote attacker, then that'll be the predominant way to hold the keys. And also, there's lots of different types of users too. someone asked about merchants. I think merchants are another obvious case of where there'll be a lot of merchants around the world who are doing daily business in Bitcoin, and they'll want to self-custody at least a portion of the coins that they're receiving. And so that's another really important target market too.
Thank you.
5 minutes.
Okay.
Just a more general, are you able to speak a little bit about what Spiral's doing with Bitcoin mining? I think you mentioned that they're working on that.
Yeah, so it's not Spiral. It's actually but I'll speak to it. Yeah, so there's a new project at Block. It's so it's a for-profit initiative, and but I helped out with that, so I know quite a bit about what they're doing. I'm really excited about it. If you look at the current mining space, there's two major ASIC manufacturers, the specialized chips to do Bitcoin mining, and they're both in China. So there's a number of problems with the current situation. Number one, there's only two, so the more the merrier. Like, we want more competition. And number two, they're both in China, so there's like geographic risk. Third problem is both companies have very closed ecosystems. They don't publish like the data sheet for the chip that explains how the chip works. They don't even sell the chip. They only put it in their own designed mining rigs and sell the mining rigs. So it's a very closed ecosystem. What Block's going to do is completely address all those issues. I mean, one, it'll be another company manufacturing ASIC chips. Block does intend to design its own ASIC chips. It'll do its best to minimize how much supply chain is from China or assembly in China. So hopefully better geographic distribution of the design and manufacturing of the chips. And the intention is to make these chips open source and sell the chips outright. And I've had many conversations with my existing mining companies who know their customers really well, but they have mining rig designs that they'd like to proceed with, but they can't source the chips. So they can't, unless they actually design their own ASIC chips, which is a huge undertaking. They can't do their own custom design. So I think the fact that we'll sell chips directly to other companies in the space will be very much, that open ecosystem will be really successful. And like the ultimate like holy grail for mining is at-home mining by individuals with solar. That's the holy grail, because it's like off the grid electricity, it's sustainable energy, it's combined with a software protocol called Stratum v2. You can do transaction selection as a miner. It just helps with decentralization tremendously. So that's like the holy grail. Just recently, the big hurdle with at-home mining, I mean, there's like the noise, the heat, all these things. I think all that can be solved though. You can make that turnkey. The biggest concern I had with at-home mining is the economic viability of it. If you're doing like solar and only mining a portion of the time, you're competing against miners around the world who are mining around the clock. How do you compete with that? And last fall, it finally dawned on me and some others in the space that you basically just have to use old chips and old equipment that's sort of been priced out at these large industrial mining farms. It's no longer economically viable for them. So they could just throw the equipment away for $0, or maybe even have to pay someone for the e-waste, or they could sell it refurbish this equipment for at-home mining. And if you can buy it cheap enough, you're effectively using zero cost energy, and then it can be economically viable. So I think that's the long-term holy grail. But in between, I think just doing this open mining ecosystem will be a big win, even for large industrial farms.
Got it. So to be clear, Block is becoming a semiconductor foundry as well as ASIC chip manufacturing.
Not a foundry.
Okay.
Like TSMC.
You're not going to be TSMC.
That's like $20 to $40 billion.
Yeah. So because I was expecting the same. Design chip designers. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, so like Intel and TSMC and Samsung, there's just a handful of foundries which are this massive investment. It takes like 5 years to build out the factory. At least that's not yet in the. No, but even designing the chips is complex. But most people don't know this, but Square has ASIC chip designers. Like Square's a hardware company, right? It's always been a hardware company. They make the payment terminals that you see at a coffee shop. And inside those are custom designed ASICs by teams of engineers at Square. So there is expertise in designing ASICs and obviously working with a foundry to actually manufacture them. So this isn't like just a software company out of the blue designing ASIC chips, and Square knows what they're doing. But there's a lot of know-how in Bitcoin mining that we're learning, and hopefully we'll hire in some expertise as well.
We'll take one more question, and then Steve, I think you're going to stick around.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah, so you guys can ask me a question after, but we'll do one more question.
Why do you think Bitcoin is going to change the world?
Good question. I think it's the best money that's ever been invented by humans. So I think it's going to change the world because I think it'd be like the preferred money around the world. And why? The common narrative, of course, is like, taking away the central banks and having a sound monetary policy. I think is one reason why. But one that's maybe less talked about is sort of the original white paper, like peer-to-peer cash and censorship resistance. I mean, as human societies, like we've transacted without a central third party or a third party like our entire, like for centuries. I go to the market, you sell me something, and I hand you coins or seashells or whatever, some form of money. I hand it to you, you give me the goods, and no one else had to partake in that. During our lifetimes, we've had this radical shift to digital money for good reasons. It's super convenient, there's all kinds of benefits to it. But the scary part is that there's, with the flip of a switch, you can turn things off. And I think, the Canadian trucker situation, whatever your perspective on that, and even if you don't like it and you think, it's illegal, it's still scary that the government can flip a switch with no due process and just turn off a ton of people's bank accounts, whether or not they're innocent or guilty. That's very scary. Imagine that at scale. Like, I think it's only affecting like 76 accounts right now or something, but like, to me, it just sets a scary precedent. Like China already has like a social credit score system. And just, to me, it's a scary world where, if your cousin says something that a leader doesn't like, and then you can't take the subway because you can't pay for it because all the money is digital, that's a very scary world. So with Bitcoin being able to transact with anyone around the world without a central party, I think is super powerful. Amen.